This happened on Canada Day to one of my friends, which we'll call her Michelle. Michelle was in her early 20s when this happened, and this was sometime on Canada Day of 2012. When Michelle was probably maybe 23 at the time of this story, she was going with her boyfriend to Niagara Falls as they wanted to spend at least the Canada Day time so they can be away from everything. They were pretty much city people who like to go to places, and just have fun. However, this was one of the Canada Day moments that she would never forget. But however, one scary moment though during their trip was something she dreaded. They went to the Brett's Canadian Midway area, which was obviously quite fun. It was on Canada Day, so most places were pretty much packed, and to the point where a lot of places were pretty much crazily busy. However, though, they actually decided to go more into downtown out of Niagara Falls to see if they could find any nice areas. Of course, they came across some nice places, but they actually really enjoyed one of the places they really liked, which was called the Big Top Maze and Fun. It was a pretty neat area, and they really enjoyed it. However, as they were going inside, they realized that there was some man. He seemed to be maybe in his 40s or something, and he occasionally was looking at them in a really weird way. Michelle must have assumed that he must have been wanting attention, so he paid not too much attention to him and just continued on with her day. However, something strange was going on when this man kept looking up at Michelle. This was honestly starting to freak her out. What was this guy planning? It was obviously something not good. He seemed to have something behind his back, which they didn't want anyone to see. This was honestly really starting to freak Michelle out. Of course, her boyfriend must have told her that must have been just paranoid or something. And Michelle knew try not to get the paranoia the best of her. So as she went on with her day, she all of a sudden looked up to see that this man was walking over to her. He smelled of alcohol, which honestly was a red flag, but even though Michelle was drinking too, and same with her boyfriend, they couldn't really smell so much of it as they were pretty much been used to it. However, this man said, "Oh hey cutie, I'm looking for the casino. Do you know where it is?" Michelle honestly explained the directions to the man of where the casino is, and he said, "Okay, thank you." And he left. Honestly, Michelle was weirded out by this man, so they continued to do their own thing at the Big Top Amazing Sing area. However, though, when they were leaving, they decided to go to Pizza to pick up some dinner and bring it back to their hotel. However, though, Michelle decides to stay there as they wanted to explore the city more before everything starts closing up for the night. They headed over to Pizza, and as they were going in, something honestly grabbed Michelle's shoulder. As she freaked out, it was the same man who appeared to be the one from the casino. Obviously, her boyfriend got in the way and said, "Let go of her and get out of here before I call the police." The man acted like nothing was wrong, but he dropped something, but didn't even bother to pick it up until he left. Obviously, when Michelle and her boyfriend got to look at the weapon or something, they realized that it was a large knife. After the pizza area, and they left, they ended up going to the cops and reported to the authorities. However, though, the best description they gave of the man, and they gave it all they could, but nothing ever became of it. And they still wonder to this day what would have happened if they did not even go in the pizza place. Or what if Michelle's boyfriend never stepped in? Something could have been changed in a different scenario, like Michelle could have been kidnapped or something. She really does not want to know what would have happened if her boyfriend ever stepped up. And she clearly does not want to know. This happened on the 4th of July, and one of my my mom's friends used to go to this pool party, and they apparently started hosting it every 4th of July. It was actually one of the best as places to do so, which was at a friend's house. Now my mom's friend, which will call him Brian for the sake of privacy reasons. Brian really liked pool parties, and every 4th of July he would host a pool party. He would invite a bunch of his friends and his neighbors, close friends, and they even have a pool party. However, he was living by himself at the time, as he moved into a pretty decent home, enough for at least a family of 2 kids. He didn't have a wife or kids yet, so he used one room for his bedroom, the other 2 for a computer room and a game room. This was honestly in the 4th of July of 2014 when Brian invited a bunch of his friends over to a pool party. Of course, they decided to invite their friends too, as the word about it got around pretty quickly. Yeah, that's obviously how people know about the party. The pool party started when everyone got there, and they all started jumping in the pool and partying as they normally would do. However, though, as they were doing their own thing, one of the women obviously started hitting up on Brian, basically asking him some questions like, is he single, does he have a girlfriend, etc. Brian didn't have a girlfriend, but he was hooked up with this one woman who he known since college, named Stephanie. Stephanie seemed pretty nice, and she had a lot in common with him, and they were in class at one point, doing projects and that. However, as the partying was going on, they all of a sudden heard gunshots followed by some people screaming. Brian obviously looked inside the pool and saw that someone had been shot, as this person was shot on their arm, and they got out of the pool while bleeding, which explains why the blood was in the pool. Honestly, everyone started screaming at this point as more gunshots were heard. Apparently, there was at least a group of people wearing masks of some sort. They looked at Brian and demanded them to give him all the money or he wouldn't hesitate to shoot everybody. Just as Brian was about to protest or anything, a sound of police sirens were heard in the distance, and of course, the robbers didn't get far as the cops arrested them. The party unfortunately ended with one of the people who were shot going to the hospital. Most of them, they all survived with their injuries and none of them was killed. Apparently, the next door neighbor saw a group of people both sneaking into their house with the key in the front, which could explain why Brian hadn't seen them snuck in the house as he'd been outside. Brian has never hosted a pool party like that ever since that day on the 4th of July. Other days a pool party was just fine, as long as that there were at least a few people, neighbors, to check on everything. But of course, Brian had installed security cameras that year, and nothing like that has ever happened since. Eventually, Brian and Stephanie eventually started living together, and they are now married and they're doing quite well. But this was one story on the 4th of July that they dreaded every time the 4th of July comes and goes. On Canada Day of 2018, one of my friends, who we'll call her Katie, went to this one concert in Toronto. It was actually a pretty big concert, but I don't remember what it was. I wanted to say it was One Direction, but I honestly just don't remember, as she vividly remembers this. Katie was 17 at the time of this story, and she had a younger sister who loved a certain band who was only 12, and her name was Cynthia. Her older brother name was Andrew, and he was 20, so he took Katie and Cynthia to the concert in Toronto. It was obviously on Canada Day, so it wasn't surprising that everything would be full and filled to the brim with people. As the concert was going on, nothing really was happening, just the concert going wild, people cheering and screaming in joy. They seemed to like the crowds and they didn't have any problem. However, Katie said she had to use the bathroom, so Andrew looked after Cynthia while Katie went to the bathroom. However, as Katie went to the bathroom, she all of a sudden could hear someone walking in holding like what seems to be a gun. Honestly, she thought it might have been mistaken for a security guard, but he didn't have anything that resembled him being a security guard. So, Katie was obviously in the bathroom room, and by the time she got out, she heard what seems to be someone screaming outside. Katie, honestly, having like an instinct that someone could be in danger, she looked out to see that there was a woman, no older than 21, being dragged by a group of men into their vehicle. They honestly were torturing her in many ways, such as beating her and that. Eventually, Katie ended up debating whatever she should stop it or go to the cops. She was, however, hesitant on what to do, fearing that they might see her and drag her there. Eventually, someone who appears to be a cop ends up shouting and screaming, causing them to let the girl go as she ran off, while the men quickly run back in their car and took off. What was really frightening was that the fact that Katie had no idea what these men were doing. Eventually, she decided to keep it to herself, thinking that her brother and her younger sister may worry if she brings it up to them. She never thought about this happening on Canada Day, but she's kept it to herself since, and she does not even know what these men were planning to do, but their intentions were definitely not good. On the 4th of July, sometime around 2008, a friend of mine who was living at Chicago at the time lived in a pretty decent neighborhood. Chicago was really not the best places to live, but she lived in a pretty decent suburban area at the time, before they moved in 2010 to New York City. The friend that we're going to be referring to name was Dorothy, and she was at least a kid at the time of 2008. She was around at least 11, and she was living in a pretty decent neighborhood where they had block parties. They had a pretty big block party, and it was pretty common, especially on the 4th of July. The block party consists of many people with food and other things. However, though, Dorothy seemed to be enjoying herself. However, there was a van that said free candy on the van on it, that parked on the side of the road where it was closed off due to the block party. And a man who seemed to be maybe in his mid-50s seems to be the one that stepped out of the car. There was only one person, but he seemed to have been in a drunken state. He had a beard, and his clothing looked like they had been worn out, almost homeless. Dorothy didn't think about that, as this man obviously probably just had some sort of drinking problem or something. So Dorothy was having what seemed to be some fajitas that one of her neighbors make when this man walked up to her and said, "Hey, I got some candy in the van for you." Dorothy honestly knew about the stranger danger, said that she wasn't interested. However, the grown-ups seemed to be around, so the man had no choice in trying to sneak a kid out if it were meant him being caught. He seemed to be just wandering around the place and pretending like he was pretty much new to the town, trying to pull any kind of scheme to make it look like he wasn't suspicious. Dorothy's parents asked her if she was okay, and she said she was fine, so she was continuing to eat. However, Dorothy ended up looking over to see the man walking around aimlessly. as if he had no idea what was going on. The 4th of July event went pretty well until the end of the day, when the block party was closed up, but the man was nowhere to be found. But the free candy truck was still there. Dorothy asked if anyone knew the man knew where his truck was, but neither of them had any idea where it was or anything. So obviously something definitely could not be good. Dorothy went back in her house as soon as everyone was done cleaning up. But however, she was only 11 at the time. However, she heard a knock on the door, which her parents answered to be the police. Eventually, her father sent her up to her room, and she did as she was told, and she was just doing her normal thing. She was basically drawing or possibly playing video games, as she had a few game consoles on her TV in her bedroom. However, this did not ever seem to be very odd to her, wondering why would her parents send her up to her room when the police were there. It obviously at first didn't make any sense to her, but it started to make sense to her at least a few years later, when it was taking place in fast forward about maybe 2017, when she brought this up on the conversation with her parents one night. Her mother ended up telling her now that she was old enough to understand. She was allowed to old enough to know the truth. Apparently the man who came in the free candy was wanted for being a registered sex offender, but he was also charged for assault and etc. Apparently he had been kidnapping kids, which he had a history of really messed up stuff with kids. He was arrested and the van was eventually confiscated by the cops, and they had never heard of this man since. This man was obviously trying to lure Dorothy into something very dangerous, but Dorothy was smart enough not to fall for it, and she was lucky that there were people around, even adults, because if this man tried to take her when the adults weren't looking, God only knows what would have happened to Dorothy at that time, but the outcome would not have been good if the adults were not there.